The hull groaned around me like a dying animal, and I knew we had maybe 20 minutes left before the enemy broke through our last defense line. My name is HFY, and I am the commander of what remains of the Threnai Concord fleet. 3 days ago, I had 11 ships under my command. Now I have 4, and 2 of those are barely holding together. The Marauder Compact Armada outside our hull numbers over 60 vessels, and they have been tightening around us like a fist for 72 hours straight. I stood on the bridge of my flagship, the Solvane, gripping the edge of my command console so tightly that my fingers had gone numb. Around me, my crew moved in near silence, the kind of silence that comes when everyone already knows the outcome but keeps working anyway, because stopping feels like giving up before the end actually arrives. "Status on the shield generators," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 41% and falling, Commander," replied Torin, my tactical officer. He did not look up from his console. He had not looked up in over an hour. I think he was afraid that if he met my eyes, he would see the truth written there, and he was not ready for that yet. I understood. None of us were ready. 3 days earlier, our colony transport convoy had been ambushed while moving refugees from the outer settlements to a safer system. The Marauder Compact does not attack for territory or resources the way other hostile powers do. They attack for people. They take entire populations and put them to work in conditions I will not describe in detail, because some things do not need to be spoken aloud to be understood as wrong. We had over 4,000 civilians aboard our transports. Farmers, teachers, children, elders who had already lived through one war and thought they would die peacefully instead of fighting a second one. When the Marauder ships appeared out of the dark without warning, my fleet placed itself between the transports and the attackers, and we have not moved from that position since. We sent for help immediately. I contacted every allied government within transmission range. The Ostari Assembly said their forces were needed elsewhere. The free colonies of Braxis said they could not risk their fleet on a conflict that did not directly threaten their borders. Even the Velkari trade union, who owed us favors going back 3 generations, offered only their sympathies and nothing more. I do not blame them entirely. The Marauder Compact is powerful, and no single power in this region wants to draw their full attention. Everyone calculates the odds. Everyone decides that someone else should be the one to bleed first. I understand the logic, even as it fills me with a bitterness I have never felt before in my life. "Commander, they are moving the main assault group into position," Torin said. "I estimate they will begin the final push within the hour." I closed my eyes for just a moment. Behind me, through the viewport, I could see the transports drifting in a loose formation, their running lights dim to conserve power, thousands of lives held together by hull plating that was never designed to withstand a war. "Open a channel to all remaining ships," I said, "and patch it through to the transports as well. Everyone should hear this." Torin finally looked up. His eyes were red, though whether from exhaustion or something else, I did not ask. "Channel open, Commander." I stood a little straighter, though there was no one physically present to see it. I wanted my voice to carry the weight I could not otherwise show. "This is Commander HFY of the Threnai Concord Defense Fleet," I began. "To everyone listening, on the warships and on the transports, I want you to know that we have not stopped fighting, and we will not stop fighting, for as long as we are able. I know that help has not come. I know that the systems we called out to have chosen silence. I will not pretend that our situation has improved, because you deserve honesty, not comfort built on lies." I paused, gathering the next words carefully. "But I also want you to know that whatever happens in the hours ahead, you were not abandoned by us. We stayed. We will keep staying until there is nothing left to stay with." I do not know if it helped anyone to hear that. Perhaps it only made the fear heavier, giving it words instead of leaving it as a formless thing in the back of the mind. But I believed, and still believe, that people facing the end deserve truth over silence. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of alarms and shifting tactical displays. The Marauder assault group advanced in a wide crescent formation, clearly intending to encircle our remaining ships and cut off any possibility of the transports slipping away during the confusion. Our shields dropped to 30%, then 25%. One of our escort vessels, the Ilvath, took a direct hit along its port side and began venting atmosphere into space, a slow silver cloud that caught the light of the nearby star. Casualties on the Ilvath, Torin reported, his voice tight. "Get me their captain," I said. "Comms are down on their end, Commander. They are running on emergency power only." I felt something inside my chest crack, small and quiet, like the first fracture in a piece of ice before the whole surface gives way. I had known these people. Captain Delan of the Ilvath had served under me for 6 years. He had a daughter aboard one of the transport ships, a small girl who used to draw pictures of star systems and give them to the bridge crew as gifts. I pushed the thought away, because grief is a luxury that command does not always allow, and I still had a fleet to lead, however small it had become. "Bring the Solvane between the Ilvath and the nearest enemy cruiser," I ordered. "We will not let them finish what they started." "Commander, that will put us directly in their firing line." "I am aware, Torin. Do it anyway." He hesitated only a moment before relaying the order. That hesitation told me everything about how close we all were to the edge of what any of us could bear. The Solvane shifted position, engines straining under the maneuver, and for a moment I thought perhaps we might buy the Ilvath enough time to make emergency repairs. Then the enemy cruiser adjusted its targeting, and I understood we had only succeeded in making ourselves the priority target instead. "Incoming fire," Torin said, and the bridge lights flickered as the first impact struck our forward shields. I gripped the console and rode out the shaking, watching numbers fall across every display in front of me. Shield strength, hull integrity, power reserves. All of them sliding toward zero at a pace that no longer felt gradual, but sudden, like a held breath finally released. "Commander," said Alira, my communications officer, her voice cutting through the noise, "I am picking up something strange on an old frequency. It is not one of our channels." "Define strange," I said, not taking my eyes off the tactical display. "It is an emergency relay frequency. Old technology, decades out of date. I almost missed it entirely, because nothing uses this band anymore. Where is it originating from? I do not know yet. The signal is faint. It might be nothing, an old automated beacon still broadcasting from some abandoned outpost." I thought for a moment. We had in fact once maintained a small relay station on the edge of this system, built as part of an old first contact protocol with a distant species that our historical records referred to only briefly. Humans. I remembered the name from academy lessons decades ago, a footnote about a species that had made brief peaceful contact with several regional powers before retreating back into their own territory, uninterested in expanding further. The relay had been left behind as a courtesy, a way to reach them if it was ever needed. No one had used it in my lifetime. I had assumed it no longer functioned at all. "Send our distress signal through that frequency as well," I said. "It costs us nothing to try." "Commander, the odds that anyone is even listening on that channel are—" "I know the odds, Alira." "Send it anyway." She did not argue further. Within moments, our full distress call, our position, our situation, the number of civilians aboard the transports, was broadcasting out into the void on a frequency so old that most of my crew had never even heard of it before that day. I did not expect an answer. I want to be honest about that, because false hope is its own kind of cruelty, and I had promised my people honesty only minutes before. I sent the signal because doing nothing felt worse than doing something that would likely fail. The battle continued. Our shields fell to 15%. The Ilvath's captain, working with what little power remained, managed to get a short burst of thrust that pulled his ship partially out of the direct line of fire, buying his crew perhaps a few more minutes of life. I gave the order for the remaining ships to begin tightening formation around the transports, a final defensive posture that we all understood would not hold for long against 60 enemy vessels. "Commander," Torin said, and something in his tone made me turn immediately. "What is it?" "Sensors are picking up an anomaly. Something just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. My hearts. I have two, Both seemed to stop at once. "Identify it," I said. "I am trying, Commander, but the signature does not match anything in our database. It is not Marauder. It is not any of the regional powers we know." "Then what is it?" Illyra's voice came through, quieter now, almost disbelieving. "Commander, the ship is broadcasting an identification code. It is responding to our distress signal. The one we sent on the old frequency." I stared at the tactical display, where a single new contact had appeared at the very edge of our sensor range, alone, unescorted, moving toward the heart of a battle that 60 warships from 3 different powers had refused to enter. "Who is it?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer before Illyra spoke. "It is identifying itself as a human vessel, Commander." For a long moment, no one on the bridge said anything at all. The alarms continued to blare, the enemy fleet continued to advance, and somewhere at the edge of the system a single ship from a species we had almost forgotten existed was flying directly toward us, into a fight that everyone else had decided was not worth the risk. I did not know, in that moment, whether to feel hope or simply a new kind of fear, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was coming, it had chosen to come. No one had forced it, no treaty demanded it, no alliance required it. It was answering a call that had gone unanswered by everyone else, and it was doing so alone, against odds that made our own defense look almost reasonable by comparison. I straightened my posture, though my hands were still shaking. "Illyra," I said, "open a channel to that ship." She worked quickly, her fingers moving across her console with a speed born of desperate hope. "Channel open, Commander." I took a breath, uncertain what I would even say to whoever, or whatever, was on the other end. But before I could speak, a voice came through first, calm and steady in a way that felt almost impossible, given the chaos surrounding us. "This is the human vessel Meridian, responding to your distress call," the voice said. "I need your tactical situation, and I need it fast." I looked at Torin. I looked at Illyra. I looked at the swarm of enemy ships tightening around my dying fleet, and then I looked at the single new contact on our display, closing the distance with a speed that made no tactical sense for a lone ship approaching an entire armada. "This is Commander Vrel," I said, forcing my voice to remain level. "I appreciate the response, but I must be honest with you. Our situation is beyond saving. You should turn back before you are drawn into a fight that will cost you everything." There was a brief pause on the other end. When the voice returned, it carried something I had not expected. Not fear, not hesitation, something closer to quiet, unshakable resolve. "Commander Vrel," the voice said, "I appreciate the warning, but where I come from, we do not really believe in situations beyond saving. Now, tell me where your weakest point is, because I am about 3 minutes out and I intend to make an entrance." I did not know how to respond to that. In all my years of service, I had never heard anyone speak about an impossible situation with such casual confidence. It was not arrogance, or at least it did not sound like arrogance. It sounded like someone stating a simple fact, the way one might say that the sky is dark or that a star is hot. "Our shields are failing across the fleet," I said, forcing myself to focus. "The Ilvath is critically damaged and drifting. The main enemy assault group is pressing from the coreward side, attempting to encircle our transports. We have perhaps 10 minutes before they break through entirely." "Understood," the voice said. "I am seeing your formation now. You have your remaining ships spread too thin trying to cover every angle. That is going to get you killed faster, not slower." I bristled slightly at the correction, even in the middle of everything falling apart around us. "We are doing what we can with what remains." "I know you are, Commander, and I am not criticizing your effort. I am telling you what I see, because in about 90 seconds I am going to need your ships to move, and I would rather you understand why before I ask." Torin looked at me, silently asking whether he should trust this. I did not have an answer for him yet, but I had learned long ago that when you are already losing, taking a calculated risk on an unknown variable is sometimes the only path forward that has not already failed. "Tell me what you need," I said. Pull your 2 remaining escort ships back toward the transports and form a tight defensive ring directly around the civilians. Do not try to hold the outer line anymore. Let it go. That will expose the Solvane. Yes, it will. That is the point. I need the enemy focused on 1 target instead of 5, and I would rather that target be a warship that can take a hit than a transport full of people who cannot. I understood immediately what he was proposing. He wanted my flagship to become bait, drawing the bulk of the assault away from the vulnerable ships, while his single vessel did something I still did not understand. It was a reckless plan, built on trust, in a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, and yet, looking at our dwindling options, I found myself agreeing before I had fully finished thinking it through. Torin, execute the maneuver, I said. Pull the Aravel and the Ilvath back into a defensive formation around the transports immediately. Commander, are you certain? No, I admitted, but we are already certain of what happens if we do nothing different. Execute it. The ships began to move, engines straining under the sudden repositioning. On our display, I watched the human vessel, this Meridian, streak across the battlefield at a velocity that made my sensor operators mutter in confusion. It was small, smaller than I had expected, barely larger than one of our own escort ships, yet it moved with a precision that suggested its pilot knew exactly what every centimeter of space around it contained. Enemy flagship is hailing us, Illyra reported suddenly. They want to speak with you directly, Commander. I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Patch them through. The Marauder Commander's face appeared on our display, sharp-featured and cold-eyed, wearing the confident expression of someone who believed the outcome of this engagement had already been decided. Commander Vrel, the Marauder said, his voice carrying the particular contempt that came so easily to his people when addressing those they considered beneath them. I see you have found yourself a new friend. It changes nothing. 1 ship does not alter the outcome of this engagement. Surrender your fleet and your transports now, and I will allow your crew to live, though I cannot promise the same comfort for the passengers. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and sudden, cutting through the exhaustion that had settled over me during the last 3 days. You will forgive me if I do not trust the mercy of someone who attacks unarmed transports for profit. Sentiment, the Marauder said dismissively, will not save you. That ship you are pinning your hopes on is a single vessel. My fleet number's 60. Even with your strange new ally, the mathematics of this engagement have not changed. Before I could respond, a new voice cut into the channel, one I recognized immediately, calm and unbothered by the threat that had just been delivered. Actually, the human voice said, I would like to point out that you are including in your count several ships that are about to have a very bad next few minutes. So I would recheck that math if I were you. The Marauder Commander's expression shifted from contempt to something closer to confusion, clearly unable to place who had just interrupted his channel without authorization. Identify yourself. Captain Elena Reyes, Human Vessel Meridian. And before you ask, no, I am not part of any alliance with the Threnai Concord. I do not answer to any authority in this region, and I did not come here because anyone ordered me to. I came because I heard someone ask for help, and it turns out my people have a rather old-fashioned habit of answering that particular request. I watched the exchange with a strange mixture of disbelief and something I had not felt in days, something dangerously close to hope. The Marauder Commander's confusion deepened into irritation. 1 ship, he repeated, does not win a war. You are right, Elena said, and I could hear something shift in her voice. Something that had been calm before, but now carried an edge underneath it, sharp and certain. 1 ship does not win a war, but it can absolutely ruin someone's day. Let me show you. The channel to the Marauder flagship cut abruptly, and a moment later, our sensors registered a massive spike in energy readings from the Meridian. I watched, along with the rest of my bridge crew, as the small human vessel accelerated directly toward the heart of the enemy formation, moving in a pattern that seemed almost erratic, weaving between projected firing solutions with a precision that no automated system I had ever seen could replicate. She is going to get herself killed, Torin said quietly. though there was something almost admiring beneath the concern in his voice. I did not answer, because I honestly did not know. I had never seen a single ship move like that, threading between the firing arcs of multiple enemy cruisers with what looked, impossibly, like intention rather than luck. The first strike came without warning. The Meridian released a volley toward one of the smaller Marauder escort vessels, and the resulting explosion tore through its hull in a way that suggested the human weapon systems were built for a very different kind of engagement than anything my own fleet carried. The escort vessel did not simply lose shields or take damage. It came apart entirely, debris scattering outward in a bright, terrible bloom of light. "Enemy formation is breaking," Alyra reported, disbelief clear in her voice. "They are repositioning to respond to the new threat." This was the opening I needed. With the Marauder assault group's attention divided, the pressure on my own remaining ships eased just enough for us to pull the transports further back, buying precious distance and time. "All ships, use this window," I ordered. "Move the transports toward the outer relay point. We may not get another chance like this." As my crew worked, I kept one eye on the tactical display, watching the Meridian continue its assault on the Marauder formation. It struck, withdrew, struck again from a different angle, never staying in one position long enough for the larger, slower enemy cruisers to bring their full firepower to bear. It was not brute strength. It was something closer to art, a kind of controlled chaos that seemed designed specifically to exploit every weakness in a fleet built for overwhelming numbers rather than precision combat. "Commander," Torrin said, "the Ilvath's captain is hailing us. He says his engines are stabilizing enough for limited maneuvering." "Tell him to hold position and protect the transports," I said. "We are not out of danger yet." Indeed, even as the Meridian tore through the enemy's outer formation, the sheer number of remaining Marauder ships meant the danger to my fleet had not disappeared entirely, only shifted. The enemy commander, recovering from his initial confusion, began issuing new orders, splitting his remaining ships into two groups, one to pursue the Meridian and neutralize the unexpected threat, the other to continue pressing toward the transports. "They are adapting," I said, mostly to myself. "We need to close the gap faster." "Commander Vrel," Elena's voice came through again, slightly breathless now, the sound of controlled effort beneath her words. "I am going to need your ships to hold that defensive line just a little longer. I know I am asking a lot, but I promise you, help is not just what you are looking at right now." "What do you mean?" I asked, confusion cutting through my focus on the battle unfolding around us. There was a brief pause, filled only with the sound of alarms and weapons fire from her end of the channel, before she answered. "I mean that beacon you sent your distress call through was not just a request for one ship to show up, Commander. It was a trigger, and in about 4 minutes, you are going to understand exactly what I mean by that." I looked at Torrin, who looked back at me with an expression that mirrored my own uncertainty. Whatever Elena Reyes meant by those words, I did not yet understand it. But watching her single ship carve a path of destruction through an armada that outnumbered her 60-1, I found myself, for the first time in 3 days, believing that survival might actually be possible. 4 minutes, I repeated quietly. "Hold the line," I called to my crew. "Whatever is coming, we need to still be here when it arrives." My name is Elena Reyes, and as I hauled the Meridian into a tight roll to avoid a spread of enemy fire, I found myself thinking, not for the first time, that this was exactly the kind of situation my superiors had warned me about when they signed off on my transfer to independent operations. "Talk to me, Nolan," I called out, my voice tight with the strain of the maneuver. "Shields at 62%, came the reply from my systems officer, Nolan Ashby, seated behind me in the cramped confines of the Meridian's bridge. There were only 3 of us aboard, myself, Nolan, and our weapons specialist, a quiet, steady woman named Priya Okafor, who had not said a single unnecessary word since the fighting began. We took a glancing hit on the port side, nothing critical yet. "Yet being the important word," I muttered, banking hard to bring us behind the cover of a damaged Marauder cruiser before its escort ships could get a clean shot. I had disobeyed a direct order to come here. My orders had been clear. Stay within our assigned patrol sector. Do not engage with unaffiliated conflicts. Avoid drawing attention to independent human assets operating in this region. I understood the reasoning behind those orders. Humanity was still new to this part of the galaxy, still building relationships, still learning which powers could be trusted and which could not. Getting involved in someone else's war was supposed to be exactly the kind of thing we were meant to avoid. But then that old distress beacon had lit up on a frequency nobody used anymore. The same frequency my grandmother had helped install decades ago as part of a goodwill gesture nobody thought would ever be needed. And somewhere in that signal, buried beneath coordinates and casualty figures, there had been a simple sentence: 4,000 civilians aboard, no military value, requesting any available assistance. I had made my decision in less time than it took to finish reading the message. Enemy cruiser designation 7 is repositioning to flank us, Priya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. I see it, I replied, already adjusting our course. Give me a firing solution on their engine array. If we can cripple their mobility, we take them out of the fight without needing to destroy them outright. Solution locked. Fire. The Meridian shuddered slightly as our weapons discharged, a precise burst that struck the enemy cruiser's rear section exactly where Priya had calculated. The ship's engines flared briefly and then died entirely, leaving it drifting, powerless, no longer a threat to anyone. This was the thing about the Marauder compact fleet that I had noticed almost immediately upon engaging them. Their ships were built for overwhelming brute force combat, heavy armor, heavy weapons, designed to grind down opposition through sheer numbers and firepower. What they were not built for was speed, precision, or the kind of unpredictable maneuvering that came from a ship small enough to slip between the gaps in their formation. It was not that the Meridian was more powerful than any single enemy vessel. It was that I understood something they did not. That in a fight against overwhelming numbers, the only way to survive was to never let them use those numbers against you all at once. Captain, 3 more ships adjusting course to intercept, Nolan called out. They are starting to coordinate against us, specifically. Good, I said, gritting my teeth as I pulled the Meridian into another tight evasive pattern. That means they are not focused on the transports anymore. That had been the entire point from the beginning. I could not realistically defeat 60 warships with a single vessel, no matter how skilled my crew or how capable our ship. What I could do was become enough of a threat, enough of a problem, that the enemy commander felt compelled to divide his attention and his forces to deal with me, buying time for the Threnai fleet to reposition and protect the civilians that mattered most. It was a dangerous game, one that depended entirely on convincing an enemy who outnumbered me 60-1 that I was worth chasing rather than ignoring. So far, it seemed to be working, though the cost of that success was becoming increasingly clear on our own damage readouts. Shields at 45%, Nolan reported, urgency creeping into his voice now. Captain, we cannot keep taking hits like this indefinitely. I know, I said, scanning the tactical display for any opening, any weakness I could exploit before our shields gave out entirely. We just need to hold on a little longer. How much longer? Priya asked, the first hint of tension I had heard in her voice since the fighting started. I checked the chronometer on my console, watching the seconds tick past with an intensity that made each one feel like an eternity. 3 minutes, I said, maybe less. What none of them knew yet, what I had not fully explained even to Commander Vrel, was that the moment I engaged my emergency response beacon upon receiving that old distress signal, I had triggered a protocol that went far beyond my own arrival. Humanity's rescue and response doctrine, the one built into every deep space vessel operating near a settled system, was not designed around individual heroics. It was designed around rapid, overwhelming response, the kind that meant no distress call, once verified, would ever go answered by fewer resources than necessary to guarantee success. I had been the first ship close enough to respond immediately, but I had not been the only one who received that signal. Enemy flagship is opening a channel again, Nolan said. They want to speak with you directly, Captain. Put them through. The Marauder commander's face appeared on my display, and I could see something in his expression that had not been there during his earlier conversation with Commander Vrel. Frustration, confusion, the particular unease that comes from an enemy who has begun to suspect that the situation is not as simple as it first appeared. Captain Reyes, he said, my name sounding strange in his mouth, clearly unfamiliar with human naming conventions. You have caused considerable damage to my fleet. I will admit, more than I expected from a single vessel, but I remain curious. What exactly do you believe you are accomplishing here? You cannot win this engagement alone. I allowed myself a small, tired smile, even though he could not see my expression clearly through the transmission quality of our comm systems. You keep saying that, I replied, like it is supposed to change how I feel about this fight. Let me explain something to you, because I think there has been a misunderstanding. I did not come here to win this fight alone. I came here to make sure you were still distracted with me when the rest of my people arrived. His confusion deepened, and for the first time since the engagement began, I heard something in his voice that had not been there before. Uncertainty. The rest of your people, he repeated slowly. You are suggesting reinforcements. I am not suggesting anything, I said. I am telling you, with about 90 seconds left on the clock, that you might want to check your long-range sensors. I watched his expression shift on the display, saw him glance briefly off-screen, presumably toward his own tactical readouts, and saw the moment his confidence began, visibly, to crack. That is impossible, he said, though the certainty in his voice from moments earlier had entirely evaporated. There has been no indication of additional hostile forces in this system. That is because we are not hostile, I said. At least, not toward anyone who was not already planning to attack unarmed civilians today. My people have a rather old habit, Commander, of showing up when someone calls for help, even if that call was sent on equipment so outdated most modern systems would not even recognize the frequency. We built that old relay decades ago as a promise. Today, we are keeping it. The channel cut abruptly from his end, and I turned back to my own crew, adrenaline and exhaustion warring inside me in equal measure. Captain, Nolan said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief as he stared at his sensor readouts. I am picking up multiple new contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. A lot of them. I felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly overwhelmed the exhaustion pulling at every muscle in my body. Right on schedule, I said, allowing myself, finally, a genuine smile. Priya, hold our position and keep those cruisers occupied just a little longer. I do not think we are going to be alone for much longer. Outside the viewport, the battle continued to rage, our shields flickering dangerously low, our engines straining under the demands of constant evasive maneuvering. But for the first time since I had made the decision to come here alone, against direct orders, against every reasonable calculation of the odds, I felt certain that we were no longer fighting a battle we could not win. We were simply fighting to hold the line, for just a little longer, until the rest of the response arrived to finish what we had started. I watched the sensor display with something close to disbelief as new contact, after new contact, continued to appear at the edge of our system, each one dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, as though this arrival had been rehearsed 1,000 times before this exact moment arrived. Torin, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. How many? He did not answer immediately, his eyes fixed on his console as the numbers continued to climb. 12, he said finally. No, 13. Commander, they keep coming. I felt something shift inside my chest, a pressure I had been carrying for 3 days without fully realizing how heavy it had become, beginning, slowly, to lift. I had expected, at most, that Elena Reyes and her single vessel might buy us enough time to save some fraction of the transports before the end came. I had not expected an entire fleet. Identify them, I said. Running scans now, Illyra replied, her fingers moving rapidly across her console. A moment later, her voice returned, filled with the same disbelief that had settled over the rest of the bridge crew. Commander, they are human. All of them. Same signature classification as the Meridian, though these vessels are considerably larger. On the main display, the new arrivals began moving into formation with a precision that reminded me immediately of the way Elena's own ship had carved through the Marauder assault group only minutes earlier. These were not disorganized reinforcements scrambled together in haste. This was a coordinated response, a fleet that had clearly been prepared for exactly this kind of deployment long before our distress call had ever reached them. "Commander, the enemy flagship is broadcasting new orders across their fleet channels," Torrin said. "I am picking up fragments. They are ordering a partial withdrawal." I allowed myself, for the first time in days, something close to a genuine breath of relief, though I did not let it show fully on my face. The battle was not over yet, and I had learned long ago that celebrating too early in the middle of a fight was its own kind of dangerous mistake. "Do not relax the defensive formation," I ordered, my voice carrying across the bridge. "We do not know yet how this changes their calculations." As if in answer to my caution, the newly arrived human fleet began moving into the battle with a speed and coordination that made our own ships, damaged and exhausted as they were, look almost stationary by comparison. I watched as 3 of the larger human vessels broke formation and moved directly toward the Marauder assault group that had been pressing hardest against our transports, their weapon systems already charging before they had even reached effective firing range. "Commander Vrel," Elena's voice came through the comm channel again, sounding tired now but steady, the exhaustion of battle audible beneath her words. "I would like you to meet the rest of the cavalry. Sorry it took them a few minutes to get here. Apparently faster than light travel is not actually instant, no matter what some of the stories claim." Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the fear and the grief still sitting heavy in my chest from the losses we had already suffered, I found myself almost laughing at the casual way she spoke, as though summoning an entire fleet out of nowhere was a minor inconvenience rather than the single most extraordinary thing I had witnessed in my entire career. "Captain Reyes," I said, "I believe an explanation is owed to me, whenever you have a moment to provide one." "I promise, Commander. Full explanation once we are not actively being shot at. For now, let us just say that humanity takes distress calls a little more seriously than most people expect." The battle around us had shifted entirely in the span of only a few minutes. The Marauder compact fleet, which had spent 3 days grinding down our defenses with the confident, methodical patience of an enemy who believed victory was already assured, now found itself caught completely off guard, its formations breaking apart as ship after ship diverted to deal with this sudden, overwhelming new threat. "Commander, the enemy flagship is attempting to disengage entirely," Torrin reported. "They are pulling their remaining forces into a retreat formation." I watched the tactical display as the once overwhelming Marauder armada, 60 ships strong only hours earlier, now scrambled to reposition, no longer the hunters they had believed themselves to be, but something closer to prey, caught in a trap they had not seen coming. "Do not let them regroup and turn this into another encirclement," I ordered. "Torrin, coordinate with the human fleet if possible, close whatever gaps remain in their retreat path." "Working on it, Commander," he replied, already moving to open a direct channel with the newly arrived ships. I stood at my console, watching a battle that had seemed utterly hopeless only minutes before transform into something I could barely comprehend, even as it unfolded directly in front of me. The human ships moved with a coordination that suggested extensive training, striking key targets within the enemy formation with a precision that avoided unnecessary destruction wherever possible, disabling engines and weapon systems rather than simply annihilating everything in their path. It was, I realized slowly, watching them work, not simply a demonstration of overwhelming force. It was restraint, deliberately applied, even in the middle of a battle where such restraint was not strictly necessary for their own survival. "Commander," Illyra said, her voice quiet with something that sounded almost like awe, "the Marauder flagship is requesting to speak with you directly again." I straightened, steadying myself before answering. "Patch them through." The Marauder commander's face appeared once more on our display, and the transformation in his expression was almost as remarkable as the battle unfolding around us. The contempt and confidence from earlier had vanished entirely, replaced by something far more familiar to me after 3 days of desperate combat: fear. "Commander Vrel," he said, his voice tight, controlled in the way that suggested significant effort to keep it that way. "It seems the circumstances of our engagement have shifted." "They have," I agreed simply, offering him nothing more than the truth he already understood. "I am prepared to offer terms for withdrawal," he continued. "My remaining forces will disengage entirely from this system, provided you agree not to pursue us beyond the outer relay point." I considered his offer carefully, aware that every eye on my bridge was now watching me, waiting to see how I would respond. 3 days ago, I would have refused any terms that allowed this enemy to escape consequences for the lives they had already taken and the suffering they had already caused. But 3 days ago, I had also believed we would not survive to see this moment at all. "I am not the one you should be negotiating with," I said finally. "This engagement is no longer mine alone to decide." I opened a channel to Elena's ship, allowing both conversations to merge into one. "Captain Reyes," I said, "the Marauder commander is requesting terms of withdrawal. I believe this decision belongs to both of us now, given the circumstances." There was a brief pause before Elena's voice returned, and when it did, it carried a weight I had not heard from her before, something serious beneath the calm confidence that had characterized every previous exchange. "Commander," she said, addressing the Marauder directly now, "here are our terms. Your remaining ships withdraw immediately, and you provide full coordinates for any other captured populations currently held by your forces in this region. In exchange, we will not pursue your retreating fleet, and no further engagement will occur today. You have no authority to demand information regarding operations beyond this system," the Marauder commander said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier conviction. "I do not need authority," Elena replied. "I have 12 warships currently in a position to make this decision for you, regardless of what authority you believe I lack. This is not a negotiation, Commander. This is me giving you a chance to leave with something resembling dignity intact, rather than nothing at all." The silence that followed stretched long enough that I began to wonder whether he would refuse entirely, choosing destruction over compliance out of pride alone. But finally, his image on our display seemed to deflate slightly, the fight draining visibly out of him. "I will transmit the coordinates," he said quietly. "My fleet withdraws immediately." The channel closed, and across the bridge, I watched the remaining Marauder ships begin pulling back, their formations scattering as they retreated toward the outer edge of the system and beyond, leaving behind a battlefield littered with wreckage, but, remarkably, a fleet of survivors who had not expected to see this moment at all. I allowed myself, finally, to sit down in my command chair, the adrenaline that had carried me through 3 sleepless days beginning, slowly, to fade, leaving exhaustion in its place. "Commander," Torrin said quietly, "we did it. We actually did it." I looked at him, then at the rest of my bridge crew, each of them wearing expressions I recognized intimately, the particular disbelief of people who had genuinely believed they would not survive to see this outcome. "We did not do this alone," I said. "Remember that. Whatever comes next, remember that we did not do this alone." Through the viewport, I could see the transports, still intact, still carrying the 4,000 lives we had spent 3 days protecting, with everything we had left to give. And beyond them, the newly arrived human fleet, already beginning to organize search and rescue operations for our own damaged vessels, moving with the same quiet, practiced efficiency that had characterized every moment of their arrival. I did not yet fully understand what had brought them here. What exactly had compelled an entire fleet to respond to a signal sent on equipment so old that most of our own younger officers had never even heard of it before today? But I understood, watching them work now to save what remained of my people, that whatever the answer was, it mattered less than the simple fact that they had come at all, when no one else had. 3 days after the battle ended, I stood aboard the Meridian for the first time, walking through corridors that felt strange beneath my feet, built for a species whose proportions differed just slightly from my own, ceilings a little lower than I preferred, doorways a little narrower. Elena Reyes walked beside me, and up close, in the quiet aftermath of everything we had survived together, she looked far more tired than she had sounded over the comm channels during the fighting. "Your ship took considerable damage," I said, glancing at the scorched panels along the corridor walls, the temporary patches covering sections of hull that had clearly been breached during the engagement. "She held together," Elena said, patting the wall affectionately, the way someone might reassure an old friend. "That is more than I expected, honestly. I have flown the Meridian through worse, but not by much." We walked in silence for a while longer, passing crew members who nodded respectfully as we moved through the ship, their faces carrying the particular exhaustion that comes after intense combat, but also something else, a quiet satisfaction that I recognized well from my own crew back aboard the Solvane. "I received the final casualty reports this morning," I said eventually, unable to hold the topic back any longer. "We lost the Ilvath. Captain Dellin did not survive the final hours of the engagement, though most of his crew made it to escape pods in time." Elena's expression softened, and she did not offer the kind of hollow condolences that I had grown accustomed to receiving from people who had not truly understood the weight of what we had lost. Instead, she simply nodded, allowing the silence to hold the space that words could not fill. "I am sorry," she said finally, quietly, and somehow those simple words carried more genuine weight than any elaborate speech could have offered. "He had a daughter aboard one of the transports," I continued, feeling the need to speak the words aloud, to make his loss real in a way that silence could not accomplish. "She is safe. She does not yet know that her father will not be coming home. That conversation does not get any easier," Elena said, "no matter how many times you have to have it." I looked at her carefully then, noticing something in her expression that suggested this was not simply professional sympathy, but something drawn from personal experience. "You have had to deliver news like that before. More times than I would like," she said simply, offering nothing further, and I did not press her for details she clearly was not ready to share. We reached a small observation deck near the front of the ship, windows stretching along one wall offering a clear view of the system beyond, still scattered with wreckage from the battle, though salvage and cleanup operations were already well underway among the combined fleets. I could see my own remaining ships working alongside the human vessels, coordinating efforts in a way that felt, remarkably, almost natural, as though we had been allies for years rather than days. "I have a question I have been wanting to ask you," I said, settling into one of the seats along the viewing window, "since the moment your voice first came through our comm channel." "I imagine I know what it is," Elena said, sitting across from me, her expression carrying a weariness that went deeper than simple physical exhaustion. "Why?" I said anyway, needing to hear the answer spoken aloud rather than simply assumed. "The Threnai Concord has no formal alliance with your people. We have exchanged no resources, no defense agreements, nothing beyond a single relay station built decades ago and largely forgotten since. Every other power we contacted during this crisis calculated the risk and decided we were not worth the cost of intervention. Why did your people decide differently?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the wreckage drifting beyond the viewport, before she finally answered. "Do you know why that relay station was built in the first place?" she asked. "I assumed it was simply a courtesy," I said, part of the formal first contact protocols that were common at the time. "It was more than that," Elena said. "When humanity first made contact with your people, decades ago, we were still very new to this part of the galaxy. We did not have many allies yet, did not fully understand which powers could be trusted, which conflicts we might accidentally walk into. Your predecessors, the diplomats who negotiated that first contact treaty, made us an offer that most other powers in this region never bothered extending. They offered us information, warnings about dangerous territories, guidance about which powers to avoid, without asking for anything in return beyond peaceful relations. I remembered fragments of this history from academy lessons, though I had never fully understood the significance at the time, treating it as simply one more piece of diplomatic trivia from a chapter of our history that seemed largely irrelevant to current affairs. That relay station, Elena continued, was built as a promise, a way for us to say, if you ever need help, and we are able to give it, we will not forget what your people did for us when we were the ones who needed guidance. Most of the diplomats who negotiated that agreement are gone now. Most of the people who remember why that promise was made in the first place have probably forgotten the details entirely. But the promise itself, the protocol built into our systems to answer that frequency, no matter how old it becomes, that never stopped being real. I sat with her words for a long moment, feeling something shift inside my understanding of everything that had happened over the past several days. You came here, I said slowly, not because of any current alliance or any calculated strategic benefit, but because of a promise made decades ago that almost no one currently serving even remembers existed. More or less, Elena said, offering a small, tired smile. I will admit, when that distress signal first came through on that old frequency, I did not fully understand the history myself. I had to look up the archived records after receiving it, just to understand why our systems flagged it as priority response, rather than simply another distress call among many. But once I understood what that frequency represented, there was really no decision to make at all. We made a promise. We do not break the promises we make, even the old ones, even the ones that would have been easy to forget. I thought about every other power we had contacted during those desperate 3 days, each of them calculating risk against reward, deciding that our survival was not worth whatever cost intervention might carry. I thought about how easily humanity could have made the same calculation, how easily they could have decided that an old promise from decades past, made to a species they had barely interacted with since, was not worth risking their own people and resources to honor. Your people are strange, I said finally, and Elena laughed, the sound carrying genuine warmth, despite everything we had both been through. I have heard that before, she said, usually from people who mean it as a criticism. I do not mean it as a criticism, I said. I mean it as an observation. Every calculation I have learned throughout my career suggests that promises made decades ago, between powers with no ongoing formal relationship, should not carry enough weight to justify the kind of response we witnessed. And yet here you are, along with an entire fleet, having risked considerable resources and lives to answer a signal that most reasonable calculations would have suggested ignoring. Maybe that is exactly why it matters, Elena said, her expression turning thoughtful. If keeping a promise only mattered when it was easy, when there was clear benefit involved, it would not really be much of a promise at all, would it? It would just be another transaction, another exchange of resources for expected returns. The moments that actually define whether a promise means something are exactly the moments like this one, when keeping it costs something real, when there is no guarantee of reward, when every reasonable calculation suggests walking away instead. I considered her words carefully, feeling the weight of them settle into something I suspected would stay with me long after this conversation ended. I think, I said slowly, that my understanding of your people has been incomplete. How so? I had heard stories, before this happened, I admitted, rumors mostly, from traders and diplomats who had encountered human vessels in other parts of known space. Stories about your people being unpredictable, reckless, prone to taking risks that more established powers would never consider reasonable. I had assumed those stories described a species that acted without proper calculation, without understanding the true cost of their choices. And now, Elena asked. Now I think perhaps those stories were describing something different entirely, I said. Not recklessness, but a willingness to weigh costs differently than most of us have learned to weigh them. A willingness to consider old promises, forgotten commitments, and the value of a life that offers no strategic advantage, as reasons enough to act, even when every calculated risk assessment suggests otherwise. Elena did not respond immediately, instead turning her gaze back toward the viewport, watching the salvage operations continuing among the wreckage beyond. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a quiet sincerity that felt different from the confident, almost casual tone she had used throughout most of our previous conversations. "We do not always get it right," she said. "I want to be honest with you about that, Commander. Sometimes we miscalculate. Sometimes the cost of keeping a promise is higher than we expected, and people get hurt because of choices we made. I have made decisions before that I still carry with me, decisions that did not end the way I hoped they would. Coming here, disobeying direct orders to respond to your distress call, that was a risk. It could have ended very differently than it did. But you came anyway," I said. "I came anyway," she agreed, "because the alternative, knowing that a call for help went unanswered, simply because responding was not convenient, or because someone above my authority decided the risk was not worth taking, that felt like a worse outcome than any risk I might personally face by acting instead." I looked out at the wreckage beyond the viewport, at the combined salvage operations, at the transports, still intact, still carrying 4,000 lives that would not have survived without the choice this one captain had made to disregard her own orders and answer a call that everyone else had decided was not worth the risk. "I would like to establish a formal relationship between our peoples," I said finally, "beyond the old promise your relay station represented, something current, something both our governments can build upon going forward." Elena smiled, and this time the exhaustion in her expression seemed to lift slightly, replaced by something warmer. "I think that is something both our governments would be very interested in discussing, Commander. Though I should warn you, the paperwork involved in formal diplomatic agreements is nearly as exhausting as the battle we just survived." I found myself laughing, genuinely, for what felt like the first time in longer than I could remember. "I believe I can survive paperwork, Captain Reyes, after everything else we have both survived this week." We sat together for a while longer, watching the slow, careful work of recovery unfold beyond the viewport. Two officers from vastly different species who had somehow found themselves bound together by a promise made decades before either of us had begun our respective careers. I thought about Captain Dillon, about his daughter who would grow up without him, about all the lives lost during those 3 desperate days before help finally arrived. Grief did not disappear simply because the battle had ended in survival rather than complete destruction. But alongside that grief, I found something else settling into place, something I had not expected to feel again so soon after nearly losing everything. Hope, cautious and fragile, but real nonetheless. Weeks later, as our combined fleet prepared to escort the surviving transports toward a secure system where the civilians could finally begin rebuilding whatever lives remained possible after everything they had endured, I stood once more on the bridge of the Solvane, watching the human fleet take up escort positions alongside my own remaining ships. Torrin approached, standing beside me as we watched the formation settle into place. "It is strange," he said quietly, "how quickly things can change. 3 days ago, I genuinely believed none of us would survive to see this moment." "I believed the same," I admitted. "I think many of us did." "Do you think other powers in this region will remember what happened here?" Torrin asked. "The ones who refused to help, who calculated that our survival was not worth the risk." I considered his question carefully before answering. "I think they will remember," I said. "Whether that memory changes how they act in the future, I cannot say. Some lessons are learned quickly, others take much longer to settle in, if they settle in at all." "And the humans," Torrin asked, "do you think this will be remembered as well, by our people?" I thought about Elena Reyes, about the calm confidence in her voice as she flew a single ship into a battle against 60 enemy vessels, about the fleet that had arrived only minutes later, summoned by nothing more than an old promise and a distress signal sent on a frequency almost no one remembered still existed. I thought about her words, about promises that only truly mattered when keeping them cost something real. "I believe it will be remembered," I said finally, watching the human ships move alongside our own, escorting thousands of survivors toward a future that had, only weeks earlier, seemed entirely impossible. Not simply as a story about a battle we survived, but as a reminder of what it means when someone chooses to answer a call for help, expecting nothing in return beyond the simple fact of having kept their word. As our combined fleet began its journey homeward, I found myself reflecting on everything I had believed about the wider galaxy before this crisis had begun, about power, about alliances built on calculated advantage rather than genuine commitment, about the assumption that no one would come to help a species with nothing valuable to offer in return. I had been wrong about many things during those desperate 3 days, but I had never been more grateful to be wrong about anything in my entire life.